Welcome to the Student Success Seminar Series. Today we will review Learning from Lectures, Strategies for Effective Note-Taking. This session will start off with a self-assessment about how you approach note-taking, as well as thinking about what you do in your note-taking that is working for you and what you think you might need to change. Once we have focused on our note-taking strengths and weaknesses, we will then look at a number of strategies to overcome a few of the common note-taking challenges. Lastly, we will look at some different note-taking styles to identify how we can enhance our notes to make them good study tools. Okay, let's start with a self-assessment. This is an important step in becoming a self-regulated learner. Self-regulated learners have higher GPAs and are generally more successful in university. A self-regulated learner is a student that plans, monitors, and regulates their learning. They ask themselves questions such as, what is the best way to take notes for this type of lecture? Do I really understand this? For this activity, you will need a piece of paper and a pen. You will need to write the statements as they appear and make a note of which ones are generally true and which ones are not. This isn't a test, but more so to bring awareness to your current note-taking skills. The statements will also be posted in Blackboard, so if you don't have access to a pen and paper now, you can access this activity in Blackboard at a later time. I take notes in class. I read the assigned readings before attending the lecture. Before class, I review my notes from the class before. During lectures, I ask questions if I do not understand something. In class, I pay particular attention to what the professor wrote on the board. I try to review my notes within 24 hours of the lecture. My notes are organized. In class, I sit in front to help me pay attention. Before I write my notes, I think about what the professor is saying and I put it into my own words. When I review my notes, I try to make connections between the learning and what I already know and create personal examples to illustrate the material. As you can see, note-taking during lectures requires action steps prior to class and after class as well. Now take a moment to review your answers. Look at the statements where you place a check mark. These are your note-taking strengths. All of those that you answered no to can be considered as areas you may want to work on. Turn these statements into positive affirmations. For example, I will sit in front of class to help me pay attention. Taking notes during lectures is important for many reasons. Taking notes helps you to follow along and organize the ideas presented. When you're able to follow along, you will notice that you feel productive and confident. You can then easily identify the areas that you don't understand, making note of them and asking questions to either the instructor, the TA, or classmates after the lecture, rather than waiting until your final exam. They will assist you in identifying the most important parts of the lecture and the course. In this case, you'll be able to pinpoint the areas that are emphasized in the lecture. When studying for the exam, you'll see which areas you should focus your studying. Taking notes gives you a permanent record of what you need to study. Imagine now that it's time for your final exam and you never took class notes. All you have to go by is from memory and your assigned readings. Lastly, they prepare you for the work world. Taking good notes at meetings is related to your work performance. If you can take good notes, then you can follow up on action items and not miss or forget important details that relate to your job. Why is note-taking so challenging? We can easily lose our concentration. We may have trouble keeping up with the instructor and simply get lost in all the content that is covered. There are times when we can't figure out what information is important that we should write down. Recording our notes in an organized way can be a struggle. We may not know how to use our notes to effectively study for our exams. Take a moment to think about which of these areas you have struggled with. Now that we have identified the common challenges, let's look at strategies to overcome each. Let's start with staying focused in class. Let's face it, losing focus in class happens. Whether we forgot to eat breakfast, we are distracted by the pouring rain outside, or we are thinking about our weekend plans, we can easily slip away from the lecture. What's important is that we learn to refocus and we implement strategies to avoid losing our concentration. There are 3 areas we need to consider. We must practice intentional listening, manage our internal distractions, and manage our external distractions. Let's see how we can do this. There are different ways to practice intentional listening. Intentional listening requires us to be present and engaged in the lecture. This can start with pre-lecture prep work. First, read the course outline to determine the lecture topic. Then, complete the reading assignments and make questions under each chapter heading. In class, listen to the introduction. For example, today we are going to talk about strategies for effective note-taking. Lastly, it's always a great idea to set goals for listening. Distracting thoughts are a fact of life. Acknowledge distracting thoughts when they occur and refocus. It is good to have questions and some internal dialogue as you listen to a lecture, but be careful not to focus too much time on making judgments. Instead, flag information that is confusing or controversial for you to ponder later when you're reviewing your notes. To help manage your internal distractions, it's important that you take care of yourself. Get enough sleep and make sure you eat before the lecture. Manage any external distractions. Location is key. Find a seat where you can see and hear well, usually front and center. Take your learning style into account. If you are a visual learner, stay away from windows and sit in full view of the instructor's slides or notes. Auditory learners should sit away from noise and where they can hear the instructor clearly. Kinesthetic learners should sit near the front where they can actively participate even in the largest class. Always avoid sitting beside someone who enjoys talking in class. This will help minimize distraction. Also, turn off your cell phone, and if you have a laptop, avoid the internet. Research shows that we can't really do 2 things at once. We tend to move back and forth between activities. This happens fairly efficiently when tasks are simple, but once they become more complicated, we lose focus and productivity. Now let's go over strategies to help you keep up during the lecture. There are times in class where you feel the instructor is talking too fast, where you don't have time to write everything down. By the end of the lecture, you feel exhausted and probably overwhelmed. There are different ways to tackle this. Keeping up in class actually begins before the lecture. Being prepared is key. Make a note of terminology while you're doing your readings in advance. Bring this to class and have it open on your desk so that you can refer to it when needed. During the lecture, use abbreviations when possible. A handout titled 8 Ways to Abbreviate is available in your Blackboard. Also, develop a signal for when you are lost or have missed information. Leave a space in your notes. Keeping up in class doesn't end once the class has ended. Following up is a great way to ensure that your notes are accurate and to fill in any information you missed in the lecture. Develop a notes-sharing study group and compare notes. Compare your notes with a textbook or class readings and go see the instructor or teacher's assistant with specific questions or missed information. You will notice the benefits of follow-up during your exam preparation. You won't be searching for answers to questions right before your exam. Now we are focused and prepared. But how do we know what to write down? Watch. What does the instructor write on the board or put on the PowerPoint? What ideas are repeated or emphasized? Listen. Listen for verbal signposts. 3 key issues, the top 3, the main reason, let's compare. Information tends to be organized in basic common patterns such as compare-contrast, problem-solution, classification, argument. With each of these patterns, there are keywords, signals, or signposts that cue the listener or reader about how information is organized. Often, we don't really notice or think about these too much, but listening actively for these can really help you both determine the main points and organize your notes in an effective way. This is true when taking notes from your readings as well. In your next lecture, make a note to listen to those verbal signposts. Think. Think about those memorable examples that were given that might help you remember the material later on. What does the summary of the lecture tell you about what was important? Think about how what is being discussed relates to the course outline. Now let's review a few note-taking techniques. Techniques do take time and practice. What's important to consider is that you find a method that works best for you. A great way to practice is to reorganize your previous lecture notes. The outlining method is very common. It requires you to listen and write down points in an organized pattern. Place the important points further to the left. Indent each specific point to the right. Although this requires more thought for accurate organization, when done right, it offers well-organized content displaying relationships. The Cornell method. First, write your notes in the main space. Use the left-hand space for main ideas, clarification, or examples. Lastly, summarize in the bottom section. The Cornell method offers an organized and systematic approach for recording and reviewing notes. This technique allows you to capture the important information in a concise format. This organized format makes your study notes easy to understand. Concept mapping is great for visual learners. First, circle your topic in the middle of a sheet of paper. Draw a line from the circle and put down your major idea at the end of the line and circle that idea. You can then jot facts related to that idea. Although this doesn't allow for detailed note-taking and can sometimes get messy, this format allows you to visually track the lecture and allows you to look at connections. It's a great technique to use when taking notes for your assigned readings as well. Now that you have learned various strategies and techniques, why not create a checklist of the 10 statements in the self-awareness activity for each of your weekly lectures? This will allow you to monitor your progress. By doing so, not only will you become a great note-taker, you will also be exhibiting skill sets of a self-regulated learner. If you are completing the Skills for Success certificate through the Student Success Center, congratulations, you are on your way.